Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our devotional message today, and I must apologize for not having this one ready yesterday. I was working quite late on Tuesday night and just didn't get up early enough yesterday morning to get this one ready before I had to start my work for the study center. But we're going to be looking at fellowship from the perspective of a hymn, and I'm going to share with you this morning the hymn "Blest be the tie that binds," which if you were with us for our morning service on Sunday, you will remember was the one that I ended off with. This hymn was written by John Fawcett in about 1772. John Fawcett was the pastor of a very small Baptist church, a poor Baptist church in a small town called Wainsgate in Yorkshire. He'd been pastoring there for some time, and then he received a call to a large and influential church in London. He accepted the call and he preached his farewell sermon at the church in Wainsgate. The wagons were ready with his belongings, ready to go to London. And we are told that he and his congregation, as they said farewell, were so overcome with their love for one another, and they pleaded with him to stay. He had such a bond of unity with them that he cancelled his acceptance of the call to the church in London, and he decided to stay at Wainsgate. And he ministered there in that area till the end of his active ministry. But let's look at that hymn together, and let me share with you some thoughts from it. It's a very simple hymn, actually, quite easy to understand. So we can look at all 6 verses and go through them together. The first verse reads like this: "Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. The fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above." And this verse simply tells us that there is a bond which unites us as Christians. And it is a bond which is of such a quality that it gives us a foretaste of heaven. The fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above. Obviously, John Fawcett and his congregation in Wainsgate experienced such a bond of love that they felt that it was a foretaste of heaven. And that is how we too should experience Christian fellowship. The second verse reads like this: "Before our Father's throne, we pour our ardent prayers. Our fears, our hopes, our aims are one, our comforts and our cares." And in those words, John Fawcett is reminding us that one of the central aspects of Christian fellowship is prayer. And in prayer, we experience and should experience true unity. Whether we be bringing our fears before God, speaking to Him about the dangers that we experience, our hopes, the hope of eternity, the hope of God's working among us, our aims, our desire for the extension of the kingdom, we are united in those fears, hopes, and aims, and therefore we are united in our prayers. In the third verse, we learn about sharing one another's burdens. We share each other's woes, our mutual burdens bear, and often for each other flows the sympathizing tear. And that verse tells us that as Christians, we need never suffer alone, because we bear one another's burdens. When one part of the body suffers, the other parts suffer with it. It is an encouragement and a challenge to us to think about one another, those who are in need. Verse 4 reads like this: "When we asunder part, it gives us inward pain, but we shall still be joined in heart and hope to meet again." And no doubt these words were to some extent inspired by John Fawcett's own experience, the experience of him and his congregation in Wainsgate, as they contemplated being parted from one another. Now, of course, that particular parting was reversed, but Fawcett thought about this, and he expresses here the pain which Christians feel when they are torn apart from one another. But he tells us here that even when we are parted, there is a measure in which we are joined in heart. It's like what Paul speaks about in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 or chapter 2, actually at the end of chapter 2, where he speaks about being parted, being orphaned from the Thessalonians, and yet he says that they were still in his heart. And if we have experienced true Christian fellowship, then we should be able to testify of this kind of experience, that even if we are separated, we're still joined in heart. The hope to meet again, I think here, is speaking about the hope of meeting in eternity. The parting that he seems to have in mind here seems to be possibly a permanent parting. So we look forward to a meeting in heaven, even when we know we will not see one another here on earth again. And so verse 5 goes on to say, this glorious hope revives our courage by the way, while each in expectation lives and longs to see the day. We expect and long for and hope for our eternal home in heaven, when we will be together again. And so finally, verse 6, from sorrow, toil, and pain, and sin we shall be free, and perfect love and fellowship reign, and friendship reign, through all eternity. Our experience in eternity is not simply a personal experience where we as individuals will be free of suffering and sickness and all those pains of this present world. But one of the key aspects of our life with God in heaven will be fellowship, not only with God, but with one another. And so Fawcett writes about perfect love and friendship reigning through all eternity. Let's think about that kind of love where there is no selfishness, no sin, no deceit, none of those sinful things that spoil our relationships here on earth. And let's think about how that love can become more and more part of our daily experience here as believers, even in this present world, as we wait for God to bring about the perfection of heaven and of the new heaven and the new earth. The Lord be with you today.